My name is Daniel Marsh. I'm 42 years old. My wife, Renee, is 38. And until 14 months ago, I would have told you our marriage was the one thing in my life I never had to worry about. We'd been married 4 years. She worked as a senior account director at a marketing firm downtown, respected by everyone who mentioned her name, sharp in meetings, charming at dinners, the kind of woman people described as going places. I was proud of her in a quiet, unremarkable way that most husbands probably are. I didn't think about it much. I just assumed it as fact, the way you assume the sun will come up. The seed got planted at her company's spring gala, one of those catered hotel ballroom events with an open bar and too much small talk. I was standing near a cluster of her coworkers, half listening, when someone mentioned Renee's name alongside her manager, a man named Craig Delmont, and the table erupted in laughter. Someone said something like, "The usual Tuesday arrangement," and another person shushed him, and then everyone changed the subject so fast it left a strange silence behind it. The kind of silence that isn't really silence. It's just everyone pretending they didn't just slip. I didn't say anything that night. I told myself it was nothing, office humor, inside jokes I wasn't part of because I didn't work there. But something about the speed of that subject change stuck to me the way a splinter does. Small enough to ignore, impossible to forget it's there. I didn't confront her. I decided, without fully admitting it to myself, that I was going to find out what that joke meant before I ever asked her about it directly. The first thing I checked was mundane, our joint Easy Pass account, mostly out of habit. Since I handled the toll billing, I noticed a pattern of charges on a stretch of highway that led toward a business park 40 minutes from her office, always on Tuesday evenings, always around the same time. She'd never mentioned client meetings out that way. I didn't say anything. I just wrote the dates down. Next was her smartwatch, which synced automatically to a shared family health app I'd set up years earlier, so we could compare step counts, mostly as a joke between us. I noticed elevated heart rate readings and unusual activity patterns on those same Tuesday evenings, logged as workout, lasting close to 90 minutes, though she never came home looking like she'd worked out. I started keeping a private notebook, dates on one side, details on the other. I told myself I was building a case for my own sanity, that I'd stop the moment something explained itself innocently. Nothing did. I pulled her office parking access logs next, which I had legitimate reason to see since I was listed as an emergency contact on her building's visitor system from years back when she'd had me added during a scare with a stalkerish client. The logs showed her badge scanning out of the garage at odd hours, sometimes well after the building's other departments had cleared out, and scanning back in the next morning earlier than her usual shift. Around this time, I found an old cloud backup from a phone she'd upgraded 2 years earlier, still quietly syncing in the background of our shared family plan. Buried in a folder of automatically backed up screenshots were calendar invitations that had since been deleted from her current calendar. Meetings labeled only with initials, CD, recurring weekly, always with a location pin near that same business park off the highway. I sat with that information for 3 days before I did anything else with it. I found the email alias next, almost by accident, while helping her set up a new laptop, and noticing an autofill suggestion for an address that wasn't her work email or her personal one. A Gmail account under a name that wasn't hers at all, just initials and numbers. I didn't have her password, but I didn't need it yet. I just needed to know it existed. Meanwhile, at home, none of this showed on her face. She made me coffee every morning exactly the way I liked it. She started planning our 5th anniversary trip to Portugal, pulling up flight options on the couch some evenings, asking whether I preferred the coastal town or the city. She brought up more than once wanting to start trying for a baby that year. Every night she came home and asked about my day like she meant it. I sat across from her at dinner, some nights feeling like I was losing my mind, because the woman in front of me and the pattern building in my notebook did not seem to belong to the same person. I kept going anyway. I pulled old business trip expense reports through a portal she'd once given me access to years back, when we filed joint taxes and I helped organize her reimbursement paperwork. Buried in older filings were hotel stays that didn't match any conference she'd told me about, along with loyalty program summaries showing points accumulated at a specific hotel chain far more frequently than her stated travel schedule accounted for. I cross-referenced the point totals against a rewards app on her old backed-up phone and found stay dates stretching back over 2 years, most of them clustering around the same recurring Tuesday pattern. a former coworker of hers, a woman named Priya who'd left the firm the year before under circumstances nobody talked about directly, agreed to get coffee with me after I reached out under the excuse of asking about job references for a friend. Halfway through the conversation, unprompted, she mentioned that Craig Delmont had a reputation, that at least 2 other women on the team had either transferred departments or quietly resigned, rather than deal with what she called the favoritism thing, and that everyone above him seemed to look the other way because his numbers were good, and nobody wanted to be the one who filed the complaint. I found an anonymous letter in Renee's desk drawer a few weeks later, while looking for a spare charging cable, unsigned, warning her to be careful how this ends for both your sakes. I photographed it and put it back exactly where it had been. By this point, I had pulled printer logs from a shared office account she occasionally used, accessible to me because I still had her old login saved from a project we'd once collaborated on. The logs showed print jobs for hotel confirmations, restaurant reservations, and once, unmistakably, a printed itinerary for a weekend trip to Charleston that had never appeared on our shared calendar, dated a weekend she'd told me she was at a work retreat with the whole team. I requested, through a lawyer I'd quietly retained, legal access to time-stamped CCTV footage from the parking structure of the business park, citing a documented safety concern tied to the anonymous letter. The footage showed Renee and Craig arriving separately and leaving together week after week across a stretch of nearly a year. By then, I understood this wasn't really a story about my wife anymore, not entirely. It was a story about a manager who had built a pattern of manipulation across multiple women over several years, protected by good performance numbers and a company culture that rewarded results over asking questions. I found expense report irregularities tied to Craig specifically. Reimbursements for client entertainment that lined up suspiciously well with those same hotel stays, paid for on a corporate card, meaning the company itself had unknowingly funded part of what was happening. I didn't go to Renee first. I went to the company. I compiled everything into a single organized file: toll records, parking logs, calendar screenshots, hotel loyalty data, printer logs, expense discrepancies, the anonymous letter, and a written summary of my conversation with Priya with her permission to reference it. I sent it to the company's board through their compliance hotline and separately to a corporate investigations firm I retained through my lawyer, along with a formal report to the appropriate financial oversight body given the misuse of corporate funds. The investigation moved faster than I expected once it started. Craig was placed on leave within 2 weeks, terminated within 6, and it came out during the process that Renee wasn't the only one. There were at least 3 other women whose situations mirrored hers, one of whom finally came forward once she learned she wasn't alone. The financial misconduct piece alone was enough to trigger an internal audit that went back nearly 4 years. Only after all of that had already been set in motion, after Craig had already lost his job, and the company had already confirmed the financial irregularities on their own, did I sit Renee down at our kitchen table with my folder. I laid it out in order, tolls first, then the smartwatch data, then the parking logs, the deleted calendar invites, the email alias, the hotel points, the Charleston itinerary, the CCTV stills, and finally, the outcome of the company's own investigation, which by then was no longer something either of us could argue with. She denied it at first, said the tolls meant nothing, that the hotel stays were work-related, that I was piecing together a story out of coincidences. Then her explanation started shifting, the Charleston trip becoming a girls' weekend that slowly turned into something else when I asked which friends had gone. By the time I set down the CCTV timestamps, she stopped talking altogether and just sat there, staring at 14 months of her own life laid out in a folder across the table she'd once picked out with me at a furniture store on our first anniversary. She cried. She said it had started slowly, that Craig made her feel important in ways she couldn't fully explain, that she never meant for it to become what it became. I didn't yell. I didn't need to. Everything that needed to be said had already been said by the evidence itself. I filed for divorce 2 weeks later. There was no dramatic courtroom scene, no public unraveling, just paperwork, a mediator, and a clean division of what we'd built together, made easier by the fact that neither of us had the energy left to fight over furniture and photo albums when the real damage had already been done somewhere else entirely. I moved into a smaller place near the river a few months later. I still make my coffee the same way every morning, just without anyone across the table asking about my day. Some mornings, that silence still feels heavy. Most mornings now, it just feels like mine. I didn't destroy anyone out of anger. I just refused to look away once I started seeing clearly, and I let the truth do the rest of the work on its own. I lost a marriage I thought would last the rest of my life. What I got back slowly, over the months that followed, was something I hadn't realized I'd misplaced somewhere along the way. My own sense of steadiness, the quiet confidence of a man who trusts his own judgment again. If you'd found that first inside joke at a company party, would you have let it go or started digging the way I did? Tell me in the comments. And if this story kept you hooked until the very end, hit like and subscribe for more.